Perfect. Hello, everyone. My name is Emily DeLay, and I'm a graduate instructor in fashion and apparel studies here at the University of Delaware. Thank you so much for joining the latest episode of the FASH455 interview series. This series provides our students with a unique learning opportunity to hear from industry experts and senior policymakers on current global textile and apparel trade and sourcing issues. The state of the U.S. domestic textile and manufacturing is gaining new momentum these days. On one hand, higher tariffs appear to be creating growing opportunities for bringing textile and apparel production back to the United States. On the other hand, some data suggests that domestic production is not increasing despite these higher tariffs. So, what exactly is happening with made in USA textiles and apparel? And can the US remain a viable sourcing option for fashion brands and retailers going forward? Really, to help us answer all these questions, we are fortunate enough to welcome John Sedivy, our distinguished guest speaker. John is the Vice President of Corporate Purchasing at Mount Vernon Mills. And I will also be joined today by Dr. Sheng Liu for our interview series. So thank you again, John, for joining us. Just to start with, can you please briefly introduce Mount Vernon Mills to our students? For example, could you share the company's history, its core products, and really what distinguishes it from other suppliers?
Thanks, Emily, and thank you, Dr. Liu. It's an honor to be on your recording today. So Mount Vernon is very old. We're a 181-year-old company. So we like to think that that's an important thing, but we are grateful for our past, but we can't look to it. Obviously, people need us to be there in the future. So we are anchored in the past, but working very hard to remain relevant and to do even more new things in the future. So very old company, privately owned. We only make woven fabrics, and so we're a pretty old weaver of textiles here, always been in the United States. And a couple of the things about us that are probably unique are we are vertical. Now we're not vertical in everything we make, but we can, and we do, we open bales of cotton and I'll say out the other end, although it's actually spread across multiple facilities, but out the other end, so to speak, comes fabric that's dyed, or in the case
Wow.
of denim, that's indigo dyed, just in the warp, of course. And so we literally take cotton and out the other end comes fabric, and that fabric is ready, for people to cut up and sew into garments. We don't make any garments, but so we're vertical in that regard. And then the other thing about us is we have probably one of the most capable full width finishing plants, dyeing and finishing plants in the US. And it's, candidly, it's very difficult to get those cited anymore because of a lot of regulations it's just economically hard to open a new finishing plant, but ours has been there a very long time. So we view that as kind of a distinguishing factor for us, so that we can take everywhere from cotton all the way out the end of the uh, process to have dyed finished fabric that's ready to be made into garments. And then I guess the last thing, which is fairly new, we've been working on it for a while, but we are actually, just this week, we've been at two trade shows. We are reintroducing American-made selvage denim, and which for us, it is a niche part of the business for sure. There aren't any of those machines made anymore, so there's very much a governor, so to speak, on how much can be made. But we are the stewards of some really cool machines from the 1960s, I guess it is. And so we're proud to be introducing that. We also make regular airjet woven denim all the time, so to speak. But the selvage is a really cool part of the story for us, and so we're definitely leaning on our history in that market. But we're also glad that the U.S. market's been asking for American-made selvage for a couple years now, at least, and so we're glad to have that opportunity, and we're going to make it a business.
Sure. Thank you so much again for joining us, John. And I'm really excited to learn many, great products and also, the vibrant industry you described. So maybe you can also talk a little bit more about, from your perspective, what should our students, mostly they're fashion and apparel majors. So what should our students and also maybe the general public know about the current state of textile and apparel manufacturing in the US? And also, I assume when you read the news, sometimes we see some misunderstanding or misconceptions about our industry. Can you maybe highlight a few, from your reading? Thank you.
Sure. Yes, I'll focus my comments mostly on textiles because that's what I know the most about that we obviously sell. And by the way, I should have said really all of our products, probably 90% of them, go into apparel production. So we have a little bit of business that's maybe industrial and other things, but it's mostly apparel focused and mostly bottom weights, heavier stuff. There's some industrial weight shirtings and whatnot, but a lot of it is bottom weights. So in terms of the domestic industry, is a couple things. Misconceptions are probably that it's, uh, I mean, I just talked about how old we are, but that it's very old and, antiquated, dark, dingy, all those things that people often just think about manufacturing generally. And of course, making textiles is one of the oldest industries known to humanity. So it's often thought of as, well, hey, those US companies and really textiles in general, it's kind of dirty and low tech and grubby, so to speak. But in fact, our facilities are, to the degree they can be, they've been automated. The looms, excepting those ones from the 1960s, today's looms that we run most of the time are very modern, computerized, energy efficient, highly predictable in terms of their quality. And if something goes wrong, it kind of tells you what went wrong. So really kind of like a modern automobile, you're kind of driving a computer, it seems like, in terms of a lot of our manufacturing. It's much more modern than people expect. It's also not nearly as labor intensive. Uh, Even going back 30, 40 years, it took a lot more people to make the same yards or pounds, however you want to measure it. So it's much more technical in terms of literally technology than people think, much less labor intensive. And I remain convinced that the US is a highly sustainable place to make textiles, partly because of regulations and laws here carry a lot of weight. They actually are enforced and things like that. And just from a footprint, much of the world's garment production specifically comes to the United States. Well, if you make the textiles here and you make the garments here, or maybe you make them nearby, near shoring, you just have a lot less transit. You have a lot less waste because your lead time is shorter, so you're better at forecasting. So there's lots of things about the industry I think are not understood. So that's the misperception. Uh, the one in terms of the state of the industry, I'll be candid, we have been in a very tough 5 to 10 year cycle. I was at a conference last week and heard from Kim Glass, who's the head of NCTO, the National Council of Textile Organizations. And she was recounting just in the last 2 years, I think it was 41 different locations of various kinds, spinners, dyers, weavers, knitters, whatever, of textiles generally have closed. So the industry is really on its back foot in many ways. And we're trying everything we can from a policy standpoint and whatnot to raise that awareness. We believe, in addition to obviously we want to be in business, but it's a national security challenge. You have to be able to clothe your military, and it's great to have all the other amazing weapons and whatnot. But unfortunately, it's humans that have to go to war, and you have to be able to provide for them. So all that said, the biggest challenge we have is just the scale that the industry has lost, and it's not happened in the last just 2 years. It's been ongoing, but we've reached a very, very critical point in terms of industry mass that is needed to remain viable.
Yeah, wow, this is so incredible, and I think so important for our students to understand really what's going on in manufacturing in the United States, specifically with textiles. To change the conversation just a little bit, there's been considerable discussion about using tariffs to support U.S. manufacturing. Based on your experience, have recent tariffs helped strengthen U.S. textile manufacturing or encourage more domestic production? Why or why not?
I would say at best they've been neutral tariffs, that is. And there's a couple different things going on. So, like all the machinery, or almost all the machinery we use, is made usually in Europe. Some of it's made in Asia, but the vast majority of it, and this is long standing, that the Europeans, specifically the Germans and Belgium and some other countries, have, in knitting, it's usually Italy, have dominated textile machinery design and manufacture. Well, what that means when you need parts and all these things wear out at different times, different pieces wear out, you have to replace them. Well, those parts are now tariffed from many countries. So that's not helpful. It's not a material cost, so it doesn't go into your cost of goods sold, but it does impact your overall operating costs. So that's not helpful. Probably what's hard to measure, but I think is probably there, is that the tariff actions that have been taken by the administration, I think, have at least given folks who are making in this hemisphere a reason to probably to stick around, to continue making here. Just because I think most folks, despite some of the noise about Mexico and Canada and even some actions about Mexico and Canada, I think almost any U.S. administration realizes that we need our neighbors to be healthy. And so though those tariffs may come and go, my belief is, and I think it's true in the apparel side of things, that the folks that are making nearby here probably will continue to do so. So that's probably stabilized, I hope. Can't measure this. It's very hard to know what didn't happen. But I think it's probably stabilized some of the demand for U.S. textiles. But so that's kind of the pluses and minuses of the tariffs as they are. The overarching issue is that they have been put in place by executive action. And in the American system, you get a new executive or potential for a new executive every 4 years. And that relatively short horizon is really hard for anybody to make, whether it be textile investments that tend to be larger or sewing plants that are a little easier to move around and a little less heavy in terms of industry. But it's hard to make investing decisions if you're an operator of a plant or a multi-leveled supply chain solution for the apparel business. It's very hard to know where you should put your money because it could all change. I mean, obviously we've seen it change a whole lot in just the last, what's it been, 18 months. But even if you had an executive that on day one made those policies in 4 years, it could be completely different. So the uncertainty, long way of saying the uncertainty of the tariffs, in addition to the actual monetary issues, the uncertainty of how long they'll be around, will they stay in the same form? Will certain countries work out a deal? It's kind of paralyzing. And so that's not been helpful. I think I understand why the administration did it and they used executive action because that was the quickest. But from a long-term standpoint, it's not really that helpful.
Yeah,
Thank you.
John, I totally agree with you. I think, Emily and I actually just did a study. We survey, some of the largest US based fashion brands and retailers, and they tell the same story. No tariff, no, if they know what tariff rate they're going to face, there can be some measures, taken to mitigate impact. The much worse case is they do not know what to expect. This kind of uncertainty definitely change brands and retailers, their sourcing behavior, or what kind of vendors they would like to work with. And even worse, this can apply to, just like you mentioned, for manufacturers, because when you guys make, or decide whether to invest or not, it's not just about 1 year return of investment. Sometimes it can be like up to 10 years of, investment. So, how to leverage policy, to create a stable and predictable business environment can be so important. And unfortunately, right now, the current tariff policy kind of do the exactly opposite.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so fascinating too because I love that you said you had a neutral kind of perspective on that and talking too about how, maybe tariffs can actually help, but the way that we've approached it isn't a long-term solution, not going to provide us long-term benefits. So I thank you so much for that perspective, John
Yeah,
and Shang. I
real,
really appreciate it.
yeah,
Um,
real quick, if I can,
Go
I just
ahead.
like, if it's helpful for the students that will watch this, I just think of it like a game. And if everybody knows what the rules of the game are, some folks will jump on the field or on the court if we're talking about a sports game. We'll jump on first, but people will get involved. They'll work out a strategy, they'll have a training regimen, and they'll get in the game. When the rules of the game, in this case, trade policy, are changing, okay, we're 3 minutes in and it all changes. Everybody starts to just like, well, I'm just backing away. I'm just going to stay on the sidelines because I don't know. I'm willing to play, but I have to know what my risks are, how I could win, how I could lose.
Mhm.
And right now, the rules keep changing. So everybody just kind of sits, or they keep doing what they're doing. They're not necessarily buying less, maybe a little bit, might buy a little bit more here and there, but all in all, it's kind of a wash because the companies don't really know what the rules are going to be in 5 minutes.
To continue off this topic, one challenge to bringing U.S. domestic textile and apparel manufacturing back is rebuilding the supply chain, especially for fabric manufacturing. What is your observation here, and really what has been the key bottleneck to fabric manufacturing in the United States?
So I'm going to comment again mostly about wovens because that's what we do. I know some friends have some friends in the knits, so it's probably applicable for them as well. The biggest thing we run into, and I personally run into quite often, personally on behalf of the company, is yarn supply. And I mean, I have great friends in this business. So I don't know if any of them will watch this. I love them. They do a great job. But in terms of, they tend to be specialized in a certain type or family, so to speak, of yarns. And and they're generally set up for large volume, or they're there's not much in the middle. They're either really large scale suppliers or they're extremely small and sometimes you need something in between. So, and of course, from our standpoint, we do, as I mentioned, we do some spinning ourselves, but it's only of a certain type and we're fairly limited on the fibers we can use. So some of the other yarns are really challenging to find, particularly in the United States. We can get some from regional partners, let's say from Mexico or Canada, but even there, it's pretty limited. So it's not the very first step. Fiber is the first step, but if you can't get yarn made, you definitely can't get fabric made. So that's a big challenge for the industry, and I would say specifically, fashion tends to be, and though we sell into the apparel business, we don't think of ourselves so much as a fashion company because most of our product goes into workwear and protective that doesn't have as much styling as fashion would. But fashion has a lot more fabrics, a lot more fibers, a lot more weaves or knit patterns, prints, yarn dyes, all that stuff. And that's very challenging to do here. Mostly, it's not all. Some of it is the ability to print, let's say, or do yarn dyes well. But it's really, really challenging to do what I would call the true fashion stuff here, because mostly because of yarn supply. Some of it is maybe also fabric, and then of course the cut and sew to make the garments is a whole other matter in terms of labor availability and cost. But from our standpoint, it is mostly a yarn, uh, not so much volume, but yarn variety
Yeah.
is the constraint.
Yeah, and John, I really like your comments because this really, reminds me about, the kind of like the different perception. In the media, they often just feature one specific male, okay, oh, there's a new mill be opened, it make apparel or make some type of textile here in the US. But the key issue is supply chain. It's not just about bringing or rebuilding one to two factories. It's about how to rebuild the supply chain. Even though, like you mentioned, even for fabric manufacturing, fabric is one part of the supply chain, but fabric manufacturing itself also has a supply chain issue to solve. So this is really showcase the challenge facing, rebuilding textile and apparel made in USA.
Yeah, I mean, the word chain, we talk about it all the time. It's
Yeah.
almost like the air we breathe, but it really is a chain. And if one link is broken, you can't pull from one end to the other. And I think a lot of what would be helpful is kind of a technical skill, or not sort of technical skill, but I think a lot of companies and even just in the media would do well to actually try to map the supply chain, not necessarily addresses, so to speak,
Right.
in geographic places, but map from here's your raw material to here's your finished product. And and kind of even give it a grade along the way about, okay, this part of the chain is really strong. This part has just one supplier, and they're maybe a little shaky in terms of their viability. And so to do that would really tell folks, you know, how good, because again, if you've got one spot that's weak, the whole thing kind of falls
Yeah.
apart.
The vulnerability aspect. Yeah. So great. So let's also move on to another topic. Sustainability. So it's such a buzzword and very important. I know kind of there's a perception, for textile and apparel made in USA, no matter for the production process or for the final product, they're regarded as more sustainable than those made overseas. So do you think sustainability is shaping or reshaping textile and apparel made in USA can also be turned into like some kind of like a competitive advantage for, domestic textile and apparel mills?
Yes, neat question, and I'm going to try to remember to answer this in two ways. So first of all,
Okay.
just from what we would normally think of as sustainability, I'll say yes. We only use cotton that's grown in the United States. There's really no reason for us to use anything else. So the cotton doesn't travel very far. We spin it in North Carolina. We weave it either there or Georgia. So that footprint's not very far. Much of our cotton comes from the Southeast. So if you were to, somehow embed yourself inside of a fiber and and follow it through our supply chain, we're probably less than maybe I'll say 1,000 miles total till the fabric goes out the door compared to most of the U.S. cotton crop and almost all Brazil's, for example, travel to Asia. Some maybe to Turkey and places like that, but they travel literally halfway around the world, just the fiber. Then it gets made into various different steps until you get a garment, and then that garment, if it's come back to the U.S., literally has to come the other half, make another round trip. And so, just from a transportation standpoint, the U.S. is, if you're going to sell garments here, the whole thing is just much, much shorter in terms of geography. Secondly, for us, I mean, we use far less water than we did, let's say, 10, 20 years ago. Uh, we are much more energy efficient. And a lot of that's because it's in our interest to do so, but it's also just smart. It's in our financial interest, but it's also good stewardship of the planet we inhabit. So, we're using less inputs than we ever have. Even growing cotton in the United States has the input, though it's famously a high input crop, it is lower than it used to be. And so we've got those kind of things going on. Obviously, we abide by all the laws that are required in the United States. I mean, we tell people who ask, because we occasionally have folks want to come check us out for social compliance, and we said, look, we do all the things that are required. OSHA's got a lot of laws or regulations, or various state governments where we operate have regulations, and we abide by them all. We provide, healthcare for our employees. We even have a nurse practitioner on site almost all the time in a couple locations. The others are at least once a week. So we're doing all kinds of stuff to care for the folks that make our products. And then so that's I guess I would say the sustainability in the way it's normally thought. One other thing I'll mention, we run mostly everything we run has some cotton in it. And though cotton is a high input crop to grow, it is 100% biodegradable. If you buried, a totally cotton t-shirt in the ground for, I don't know what it take, 3 months or something, it would rot. It would start to rot. I don't know if it'd be totally gone. So, we like the fact we do use some other non-natural fibers because they're necessary for what our customers need. But we run a lot of, just a naturally sustainable fiber. And I know that there's been a push, and I'm glad to see it, a push to use more, not just U.S. cotton, but cotton generally. It's a lot of the performance stuff has some neat attributes, but it doesn't really go away when you're done with it, whereas cotton actually will. So that's the more normal, sustainable things people talk about. The thing that's not often talked about, but is a consequence of a global, as in halfway around the world supply chain, and I know this from personal experience, is you end up with a lot of waste because forecasting, particularly less so in our business, we basically make a lot of the same stuff month after month because the styling doesn't change. But in the fashion business, it's really hard to forecast if you're making decisions right now for spring 27, and you're buying goods now and you're placing POs, you're at least placing fabric orders. There's a whole lot that could change between now and then. And so you inevitably have waste, not like cutting room waste, but you get finished product here in the United States and it doesn't sell because the weather was bad or for whatever reason, people didn't like that design. And so and yes, there's a market for the off-price business that gets sold, but ultimately it is the textbook definition of waste. If you're to think about it in lean, you have too much inventory. That's why you have to sell it off. And yes, it does get sold in the off-price market, but people are probably buying it there because the price is really good, not because they need it. And so ultimately, it just creates a lot more and we know this industry is a huge part of the carbon footprint that humans make on the planet because we waste a lot. And some of that waste is not cutting room, not defects in the product. We're just wrong about what we think is going to sell. So that's the bad news. The good news is if you make it in the US or really close to the US, you cut your lead time dramatically, which means you're not forecasting as far out, which means you're more accurate, which means there's less waste. So that's the kind of the hidden sustainability of making it nearby. You reduce your forecast error, which just means you buy more of what you actually need, less of what you don't, and thus you ultimately, don't sell off, which ultimately ends up being thrown away, product. And so it's actually greener. It's hard to measure that because you have to know somehow, capture what ultimately ends up being thrown away early. So
Yeah.
that's a untalked about but really important way that a very short supply chain is inherently more sustainable.
Absolutely. And I really like your answer, John, because, traditionally when people are talking about sustainability, the first reaction is you're talking about, more expensive products, right? If you want to achieve sustainability, you have to, use more expensive material. But, from your answer, it looks like we can achieve both things together. More efficient production or even lower production costs, but at the same time to make the whole system more sustainable to reduce, carbon emission, reduce the use of materials, and reduce textile waste. So I think I really like your answer here. Yeah. Emily, do you have something to add? Hey, Emily? Yeah. Emily, your turn.
Perfect. So as trade data shows, approximately 40% of US textile mill output, including yarns and fabrics, is exported particularly to countries in the Western Hemisphere. How important are export markets to textile mills like Mount Vernon, and what role have trade agreements such as CAFTA-DR or USMCA played in supporting regional textile apparel chains? Looking ahead, how could regional collaboration really be strengthened?
Yes, really important is the easy answer, the short answer. For us, if USMCA and CAFTA-DR weren't in place, we frankly wouldn't be having a conversation today. Because, as the needle, the cut and sew, left the US, the only real viable market for, because we can make far more fabric than US cut and sew plants could consume. The only real market is what's nearby. It just doesn't make any sense. Nobody in, let's say, Sri Lanka is going to buy fabric from Mount Vernon. It just doesn't make economic sense. It doesn't make logistical sense. It's terrible from a lead time standpoint for them to have to wait that long. And so really the only large markets for our type of products, and really for many, many mills here in the US, is either Mexico, Canada customers, or CAFTA-DR customers. So it's incredibly important. And again, goes back to what we were talking about earlier, that shorter supply chain for certain players is very valuable. We would like it to be valuable for more players. And so in terms of strengthening the regional collaboration, would really be the first thing, similar to what we talked about earlier, is just some more stability in the trade policy, number one. Number two would be, and there has been some effort on this, but to increase the enforcement. I generally think we have pretty good legislation or regulations, maybe is the better technical term, for USMCA and CAFTA-DR. But like many things, and textiles is no exception, there's almost certainly abuse about, particularly the origination of certain, if it be fabric, needs to be yarn forward, or if it's yarns, fiber forward. And of course, garments have to be containing products from the countries to come into the US. All that stuff has to be enforced. And if it's not, it puts us at a disadvantage, or really anybody that's trying to obey the rules at a disadvantage. So there needs to be more enforcement there. Technology will help some with that. It's easier to test. Like, you can do the isotopic testing on cotton, and kind of have a good idea where it was grown. It's much harder on man-made fibers. You can't really tell if fiber that was supposedly made in the US was really made in China or Indonesia. There's not a way to test the polyester, so to speak. But we need more rigor on the rules of origin and enforcement, for a couple of reasons. One, obviously, it help us, let us compete more evenly, but also if we have put these agreements in place just as a sovereign power, we need to enforce our own rules, because that gives us the leverage we need if we need to change something later. So there's that. That's probably the biggest thing. I mean, again, going back to what would help the whole regional supply chain is if we had a little more strength in certain parts of the supply chain. Yarn spinning would be helpful. There are also some fibers that are just not made anywhere in the region. There is polyester, there's some nylon, but there's even an exception in USMCA for some modal type fibers, because there's really nobody doing it. So there could be some things that's more on the fashion side. It would be helpful if we had a little stronger within the USMCA and CAFTA-DR. And it could also be, this is maybe a dream on my standpoint, but if there was more that could happen between those two agreements. So if it was easier to use, let's say, Honduran yarn in Mexico, or Honduran yarn comes to the US and that fabric can go to Mexico and garments can come back. That's a much bigger thing. I have no reason to believe that's going to happen, but it would make the whole region stronger if that could happen.
Definitely. And I believe in that dream as well, John. So there's two of us that believe in that dream. I'm sure Dr. Liu does as well.
Yeah,
So
three of
uh,
us. Yeah.
three of us that believe in that dream. John, many Gen Z students are not naturally drawn to careers in manufacturing. I myself am Gen Z, and it's not necessarily the first thing that I think of when I think about fashion and apparel and textile industry. What would you say to encourage them to consider working in the textile industry, and how can manufacturers make these careers more attractive to this next generation?
Yes. So on as far as what manufacturers could do, I mean, we talk about it some, but just continue to stress the fact that it's not the dirty, dingy, nasty job that a lot of people think it is. I mean, yes, it's kind of noisy in most of the locations because you have really high speed mechanization happening. And so you have to wear ear protection, things like that. But it's actually a really good manufacturing environment. In our places, most of it, some of it, the finishing plant's not, but much of it's climate controlled because it has to be so that everything works. So it's a good place to grow and spend a long time. However, having said that, I also just shared a few minutes ago how many mills have closed. So, you can't blame a younger person for saying, I don't know if I want to go into this because, look what's happened to the industry. So it would be really helpful, and which is more of an industry issue than it is an individual manufacturer or individual plant issue. But if the industry could get some help, I'll call it, to stabilize, that would give younger folks the confidence to say, I'm gonna, go all in on this. Plan to spend the next 30 years doing this. That's if they're aware of what's going on right now, and you can't blame them for kind of wondering, oh, is this really where I want to, put my chips, so to speak? So that's less of an individual company. It's more of an industry and a policy challenge, but that would be helpful. And then just continue to also talk about how it's not only is it not dirty and dingy and all that, but it's actually a pretty technically, we're always making investments and advancement. And you guys read the stuff from some of the, like NC State and some other places where even fiber science continues to advance. And so there's always going to be something new in this business. And it's partly because, people thankfully are going to continue wearing clothes. There's going to be demand for this product, even if AI takes over the world. Humans are going to sit at home wearing something and playing with AI or whatever we're doing. So there is a demand for the products. So in that regard, it's secure. It's just a challenge of keeping it here. In terms of what uh, younger folks could think about as they consider working in the industry is, do your homework, think about the companies you're looking at. Not all of our years have been easy, but look for somebody who's either been around a long time, who seems to be moving forward in the market. That's a good indicator. And then, just be ready for, I mean, I've been in this business a pretty long time. I've seen a lot of change, but just be open to learning new stuff. I mean, I use AI every day. I still learn stuff about textiles that I either forgot or never knew. So, be a lifelong learner, and then you just kind of got to, to use an example that uses textiles, you kind of just got to put the parachute on and jump. And we don't make parachute fabric, but there are people that do. So you just got to jump. But yeah, it's give it a fair shake. Look at it really hard. Don't think of it as simply something you need to do from an office and you travel the other side of the world. There really is an industry here, and we can use more talent.
Yeah, thank you so much, John. And I totally agree with your insights. Just from the educator's perspective, I want to add one point is how important education can play a role in preparing our students' interest in job opportunities in the textile mills in the future. I do remember, like, I asked our students, most students in my sourcing class, they're fashion and apparel majors. How many of you ever visited a factory mill? I mean, like a textile and apparel mill. Very few raise their hands. You can't really see the issue here, right? If they never visited a factory, how they can shape their interest in working there. And it's so important because, Emily and I had a great opportunity to visit Cotton Incorporated last year. We had a chance to really see firsthand, these, textile machinery, from, how to process the raw cotton to, spinning yarn, etc., fabric weaving, etc., really raise our strong interest. And you can really tell, a lot of things like sustainability, technology, really get involved in there, including textile recycling. So the more, our students are exposed to the modern textile mills, textile and garment factories, the more interest they can shape from these visits, the more knowledge they can have about what the current industry actually is doing. I think this can be really helpful to shape their interest. So this is also why our conversation this afternoon is so valuable. So thank you so much again for sharing your great insights with us.
Yes, thank you so much. And this concludes our interview. Again, thank you again for joining us, John, and sharing so many great insights. We truly appreciate it, and I know our students are going to appreciate it as well.
Well,